Okay, so as a general rule, when it comes to comic books, especially Marvel's side, I really prefer more of like the darker and edgier stories. Stories like Champions, I absolutely love if you can look past all the social justice warrior stuff. It's actually a really good story. It's just sometimes it just kind of gets in its own way. But Infamous Iron Man this story is going to be a perfect demonstration of what happens when Brian Michael Bendis cares about what he's writing, because this story is amazing. It's so good. Now, the weird thing here is that Bendis split it up in an odd way. Usually when comic books are done, you usually have just story arcs, and a lot of times those story arcs will be collected in trade form, where you'll see like Infamous Iron Man Volume 1 or something along those lines. Now, for the sake of my channel, I just split everything up on story arcs and just call it volumes. That way it's easier to follow. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you see listed as a volume on my channel will be a volume on Amazon, but it does mean that it makes it easier for, to follow my story. So the weird thing is that Infamous Iron Man is actually 9 issues long, but Bendis and Marvel split it into 6 and 3. So the first story arc is 6 issues, the second story arc is 3, and then presumably it'll come to an end. But the cool thing about this is that what this does is this picks up previously in the history of Marvel Comics with regards to the Cabal. Now, the Cabal was an organization that, or at least as it seemed to exist here, was around the days of Dark Reign. And so this, of course, is when Norman Osborn had basically taken control of S.H.I.E.L.D. from Tony Stark after Stark was ousted and Norman Osborn was put in his place as director, but it was also around the time that Osborn began to form Hammer. But the Cabal is a general name given to various groups who have existed throughout Marvel Comics that serve the purpose of just acting as their own little organization. I mean, it's not like, the Cabal is a singular faction. It's a name that can be used at any point in time. For example, Thanos had his Cabal during Time Runs Out. When it was Thanos, the Black Order, and Namor the Submariner, which, by the way, we will cover the Black Order. We'll probably go through all that stuff. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to time things so that between the time the first Infinity War movie comes out and the second Infinity War movie comes out, we're covering all the Thanos cosmology, eventually leading up to like Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers and all that kind of stuff. Because yes, I will finish that. For those of you guys who are asking, there's just other amazing stories that I want to tell. The fact remains here that this is basically Bendis kind of showing us who Doctor Doom used to be. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost like we don't really need a reminder. It's like we know who Doctor Doom is. Like we know what Doctor Doom is about, but it doesn't hurt. And it's cool because it's not like some grandiose display of power or something like that. What it actually does is it focuses on an interaction between the Hood, Parker Robbins, and Doctor Doom. Now, Parker Robbins is an interesting situation in Marvel Comics. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that he's basically this guy who has access to like a lot of weapons and stuff like that. And he's more akin to like the Kingpin than anything else, but he's also been extremely dangerous and powerful. For example, he has accessed and harnessed the powers of the Infinity Gems. So that shows you how capable he is. And it's just an instance where he's been able to attain absolute power for himself on more than one occasion. Not only that, he's very good at being a demagogue, which is to say rallying people to his side and positioning himself as this sort of warlord. The interaction between Parker Robbins and Doctor Doom here is basically a discussion about how Parker Robbins is asking questions that he has no business asking, in the sense that he basically asked Doom about his history. Is it true you gained the power of the Beyonder, way back in the original Secret Wars event? Because keep in mind, Doom's had the power of the Beyonder before. That was the first Secret Wars story, and then he lost it, and then, so on and so forth. But, basically Parker Robbins begins asking him about the various powers that he's had. Now, Parker Robbins actually also makes reference to a story called Triumph and Torment, I think it is. And the way this works, and this is actually going to be a very important part of the story, and we'll delve into this a little bit more as we go on, but the way this works is basically it was Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom freeing the mother of Doctor Doom himself. Now again, we'll get to that as we get further into this story, but the fact remains here that because of the fact that Parker Robbins is just asking too many questions, Doom basically just whisks him away using his powers. And it's kind of funny to see, because everybody's reaction is like, did you kill him? And Doom's like, no, I didn't kill him. I just whisked him away. But that's really how these cabals work, in the sense that there's this kind of unwritten rule that you don't go prodding when prodding isn't necessary. People don't start asking Emma Frost about her personal life. They don't start asking Namor the Submariner about what it means to be king. They don't ask Loki why he's a chick. And you do not ask Doctor Doom about his mom. And so because of this, it kind of jumps back to the modern day right now. Now, with regard to this little bit, what I want to do is I want to kind of sidetrack from this story for a quick second, and I want to refresh some people, or at the very least get some people caught up who are not familiar with what's going on with Doctor Doom in Marvel Comics right now, because I imagine there's probably a little bit of confusion there. So Doom as we know him, or Doctor Doom as you think of him, the green cloak, which actually will look amazing on the Iron Man armor. Oh my God, that looks so good. Doctor Doom with the green cloak with the, the iconic suit, that Doctor Doom existed from the time he first appeared until Secret Wars. But what ended up happening is during the main Secret Wars event, when Dr. Doom was fighting Reed Richards and they were having as much of an emotional battle as they were a physical battle, Doom finally admitted that his greatest regret, or the one thing he hated most, was that he was not equal to Reed Richards. He didn't have Reed Richards' life. Dr. Doom did not have a Susan Storm of his own. He did not have a Johnny Storm. He didn't have a Ben Grimm. He didn't have that family connection that he loathed Reed Richards for having. And so because of that, the question was asked by Doom, if you could do it all over again, would you do it different? Reed said yes. And so what happened was the Molecule Man Owen Reese, who was basically the go-between for Dr. Doom to access the powers of the Beyonders, took that ability away from Dr. Doom and gave it to Reed Richards. And what Reed Richards did was set everything back, effectively resetting the universe. Now, of course, this was Jonathan Hickman setting the stage for Marvel to basically reboot, which of course Marvel botched in the extreme and didn't do. And so the result is that when Reed Richards set things back to the way they were supposed to be, instead of making Dr. Doom inherently a bad guy, instead what he did is he restored Victor Von Doom's face, and Victor Von Doom effectively abandoned Latveria and went on this role of basically trying to restore himself and trying to prove himself to being a good guy. Now, on the surface, the premise might seem kind of lackluster, but the storytelling is anything but. This is some amazing storytelling with Dr. Doom, and that's why I'm kind of glad that Brian Michael Bendis is the one running the show here, just because of the fact that if it was anybody else, I'd be a little hesitant about it. But Brian Michael Bendis is amazing when it comes to developing characters. When it comes to writing characters, it's like the one thing that he's good at above all others. I mean, he's good at a lot of other stuff too, storytelling and so on, but if I wanted to see a new character created, I would leave it to Brian Michael Bendis to be the one to do it. But jumping back into the story again, what we end up finding out is that El Diablo has managed to capture Maria Hill. Now, this is kind of weird because keep in mind, this part of the story takes place before the events of like Captain America Steve Rogers, The Oath, where Captain America becomes director of S.H.I.E.L.D. That hasn't happened yet, as far as this part of the story is concerned. And so because of this, Maria Hill is still director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the funny thing is that with Victor Von Doom basically walking around, no one really knows what his face looks like. All they can do is recognize him by his voice. Now, of course, Dr. Doom showing up, or I guess Victor, showing up to El Diablo, there's no contest here. I mean, it's not even remotely close. El Diablo was a D-level villain at best. I mean, he was a guy who was so irrelevant that you've probably never even heard of him before, and it's not even worth explaining. It's really just, he's a guy who's like this genius biochemist and basically just starts making chemicals and things like that to allow him to perform, magical stunts, or what appear to be magical stunts. Now, this is the funny thing here, is because there's a difference between what El Diablo does and what Victor does. El Diablo is, chemistry masquerading as magic. Victor Von Doom is magic and sorcery. He's the real deal. And so because of this, El Diablo is easily taken out, and in fact, he's eradicated by Dr. Doom. And that's the crazy thing, is because Victor's basically showing there's no holds barred here. But in the idea of him killing people, or really killing bad guys, it's a reflection of the idea that he's basically trying to revamp himself. He's trying to restore himself. Now, we don't know how it was that El Diablo took Maria Hill prisoner, and even then, Victor doesn't really address how it was that El Diablo took Maria Hill prisoner. He just says, look, you were captured by like a D-list villain, so I'll walk away, you walk away, I won't tell anybody. And then Maria Hill's just kind of like, what? And that's what makes this so cool. But something else that I also hope you notice here is that Dr. Doom, as he's being drawn in this story, looks a lot like Vincent Cassel. For those of you guys who don't know who that is, Vincent Cassel was the guy who played Night Fox in Ocean's 13, and I could imagine, Ocean's 12 rather, and I could imagine him playing Dr. Doom in like a movie that Fox didn't screw up. If Marvel got like the Fantastic Four back, I could see him playing Dr. Doom, and it would actually be pretty cool, to be honest. But what ends up happening here is Dr. Doom transitions over to a woman by the name of Amara Pereira. Now, Amara Pereira was introduced over the course of really, the first Iron Man story arc as part of All New, All Different Marvel. And the way Bendis introduced her was really kind of like a what just happened kind of situation where, she meets Tony Stark, the two of them, have drinks and so on and so forth. She makes it clear right off the bat she's not going to sleep with him, but her genius level intellect is established in the fact that she's developed a cure for the mutant X gene, but has decided not to use it. Now, it's really just one of those Brian Michael Bendis things where he's just like, here's how smart they are, and we're never going to use it, you're never going to do anything with it, or we may down the line, we have no idea. But again, it's really just kind of establishing the intelligence of her character and what she's capable of. Now, from here, it's really kind of a discussion about what's going on with regards to Victor Von Doom himself, as well as what's going on with Tony Stark and Amara Pereira. Now, of course, we know there's no real romance between the two of them, or at least there doesn't seem to be, but in this part of the story, or at least in this segment, we've basically moved past the events of Civil War II, and what's basically happened is this is the aftermath of Tony Stark when he's presumably died. And so because of this, Doom really really addresses or really speaks with Amara about the feelings that she may or may not have had about Tony Stark, about even if those feelings were budding, at the very least, it's something that she can't act on right now because of the fact that Tony Stark is no longer part of the equation. And so what Doom is basically doing is he's effectively turning over a new leaf. He really just kind of goes to speak with her. Now, this is a circumstance where his reputation precedes him, in the sense that when he introduces himself, when he basically says, "I'm Victor Von Doom," the first thing to come to mind is Dr. Doom. And so right off the bat, Pereira's initial response is, this is a bad guy, like he's a villain. Now, of course, Doom isn't here for anything grandiose. He's not here for anything major. He's not even hitting on her or anything like that. It's him just basically saying, I came here because I know who you are and you remind me of someone and I just wanted to meet you. And so what ends up happening is he actually just kind of teleports himself away. And the reason seems to be that instead of him continuing a conversation, or instead of him just being here strictly for that purpose, he was more or less forced to leave. And the reason why he was forced to leave is because of the fact that almost immediately after he takes off, Ben Grimm arrives. Now, with regards to Ben Grimm in Marvel Comics, that's kind of, again, another one of these funny situations. Marvel has yet to reestablish the Fantastic Four, and we don't know if they ever will, just because of the fact that Marvel got mad that Fox wouldn't give them the rights back to the Fantastic Four, so Marvel took their ball and they ran home. So because of that, we'll probably never see the Fantastic Four restored unless Marvel gets the rights back to the Fantastic Four in film form. But in lieu of that, we still have Ben Grimm, we still have Johnny Storm. Now, of course, Johnny Storm's with the Inhumans, and Ben Grimm is basically an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's effectively their strong arm. He's the guy that goes out and carries out missions that require a kind of finesse that can't be found outside of somebody who doesn't have super strength and a really bad temperament, if you understand where I'm coming from. He beats people up. That's basically what he does. But it's still kind of cool, you know. But from here, again, we don't really know exactly why it's here or why he's here. All we really know is that he's here just because of the fact that he's presumably chasing Victor Von Doom. Now, at this point, we jump over to Victor when he actually begins the process of making himself Iron Man. Now, of course, again, because of the fact that Tony Stark's physical body was killed, more or less, I mean, he's really just kind of in stasis. What Stark had done is he had downloaded his mind into a computer program. Now, Marvel doing this served two purposes. The first was to allow us to continue to see interactions with Tony Stark, but the second was to basically separate the lock from the key. And what's going to happen here later on down the line is we're going to see Tony Stark's mind restored back to his body, and Tony Stark will return. It's just a really easy way of ensuring that availability is there, but also allowing us to see something that goes on with his particular character. Now, the discussion between the two is actually really interesting because it's half admiration and half, dear God, I hope you don't take my suit. That's really what kind of goes on here. Keep in mind, despite the fact that they've been enemies in the world of Marvel Comics, when it comes to people of a certain level of intelligence, there's a shared respect among all of them just because of what they're capable of. So Dr. Doom is hated by T'Challa because of the fact that Doom basically invaded Wakanda during Doom War. But there's still some measure of respect in terms of his intelligence and the idea that, you know, T'Challa would not underestimate the intelligence of Dr. Doom. It doesn't mean he respects him as a person. I mean, he despises him as a person, but he respects his intelligence. And it's usually like that when it comes across these different characters in the realm of Marvel Comics. Now, with regards to Tony Stark's conversation here with Victor, keep in mind, Victor's appearance and his role in Tony Stark's life, you know, really showed us how much Victor had changed in the first story arc of Invincible Iron Man, when Victor had basically established that he had abandoned his role as ruler of Latveria, and it actually helped Tony Stark to capture Madame Mask. And so because of this, Victor basically says, hey, look, I mean, at this point, you're just a hologram, so there's not much you can do to stop me, but I'm turning over a new leaf. If you can't be Iron Man, someone needs to. And so because of that, basically what ends up happening is Doom undertakes the mantle of Iron Man and whisks himself away. But the crazy thing about this is that the entire situation is being monitored by Dr. Doom's mom, who's effectively, you know, who simply has returned to life. But there's also some disembodied voice that's communicating with her, someone that we can't see. So again, the idea of Dr. Doom's mom, you know, being alive here is a huge revelation. And the reason why is she was basically the basis behind Dr. Doom's character. I mean, she was really the origin behind everything. From the time that Dr. Doom was a little boy and his mom was convicted of witchcraft, you know, and then eventually was killed, he had always been on an effort to gain power in order to free her soul. And that's effectively what had happened. She had delved in witchcraft, she had sold her soul to Mephisto, who passes for the devil in Marvel Comics, and the result was that following her death, Mephisto was going to hold her soul forever. Well, eventually we ended up finding out that there was a bargain that was struck between Doom and Mephisto, that Doom would be allowed to fight for the freedom of his mother's soul soul once a year, and if he was successful, his mother would be freed. Now, this was Mephisto toying with Doom, and the reason why is because of the fact that the Demon Lord Mephisto is the most powerful in his own realm, and so it was almost impossible for Doom to win. And so this led into the Triumph and Torment storyline when Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange came together and then managed to fight off Mephisto and free the soul of Doctor Doom's mom, which in turn went on to heaven. Now, that was the end of her character. That was that. I mean, it was done. It was over. From that point, it was just kind of fleshing out Doom's character without the holdover of his mom's soul being held by the devil or by Mephisto. And so because of that, what this does is it comes back and it says somewhere along the line, presumably because of the events of Secret Wars, his mother's soul has been freed from heaven and she's basically been returned to her physical body. And so what this does is it changes everything, because now Doctor Doom's mom is alive, and the question becomes, what happens when they meet? Now, at this point, we transition back over to Ben Grimm. Him being in Latveria exists strictly for the purpose of tracking down Doom. That's really all it is. I mean, there's not a whole lot to go on here. It's really just him kind of trashing the place and then basically convincing the people in Latveria, or I guess the members of this ruling class, to basically tell him where Doctor Doom is, but they don't know. They really have no idea where it was that he went to. All they know is that he effectively just abandoned them. So again, it's just a demonstration of the fact that there's a lot going on besides Doctor Doom becoming Iron Man. There's still some pretty nefarious things. Now, at this point, we actually pick up over at Cambridge in England, and again, we join Doctor Doom showing up to meet with Amara Pereira. But the funny thing about this is that he calls out her name, and then she turns around and shoots him. She shoots him in the shoulder. He's like, what? You shot me! You shot me in the arm! Why did you shoot me in the arm? For all you Austin Powers fans, what was that guy's name? Was it Mustafa? I can't remember what his name was. It was Will Ferrell who played the character. It was a really, really funny moment from that movie. But the idea here, though, is that, again, this is really just kind of Doctor Doom meeting with her, but it's also this idea that her life is drastically being changed because of the actions of Doctor Doom. And the reason why is because it's not enough for him to just kind of show up in her life and then start turning things all topsy-turvy by saying, hey, look, I'm trying to be a good guy, and all that kind of good stuff. But Ben Grimm also has managed to track down Victor. And so because of this, the fight between the two of them is pretty interesting. It's pretty short, but it's pretty interesting. But the result of this is that we end up finding out that Doctor Doom had, of course, overcome Ben Grimm, but it happens off panel. Instead, what we end up doing is we actually jump directly to where it is that Amara Pereira has been taken by Doctor Doom, which is basically his own little base of operations, his own little refuge outside of Latveria. And what ends up happening here is he basically says, hey, look, I'm here because I'm trying to be a good guy. Well, then Amara's response is, but why though? Like, what happened to you that's changed your entire view of the world? And this is when Brian Michael Bendis references Secret Wars. And that's one of the coolest things here, is because when All New, All Different Marvel first kicked off, there was almost no reference to Secret Wars. It was almost like Secret Wars never happened. We knew it did, and there were maybe a handful of people who remembered, but that was it. It wasn't like everybody remembered what was going on with Secret Wars and everybody was talking about, hey man, you remember that time that Doom got absolute power? It was like this dirty little secret that was swept under the rug, which of course, again, I kind of think was Marvel's response to the idea that they chose not to reboot. But with Brian Michael Bendis focusing here on Secret Wars, it's basically Doom just recounting his story to Amara Pereira, telling her, look, there was a time when I had absolute power. There was a time when I was God. But it's also Brian Michael Bendis injecting a little bit of his own history with regards to Doom, in the sense that Doom goes on to basically say, I've always tried to gain absolute power. Even after freeing my mother's soul, I always continued to gain absolute power. And the reason why was because I thought I was living up to my potential. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was my lot in life, my role in life. But he basically says, time after time, I consistently failed. Whether it was capturing the power of the Beyonder the first time, whether it was capturing the power of Galactus the first time, whether it was harnessing a cosmic cube, whether it was gaining just these insane abilities, whether it was getting the power of the Beyonders the second time, when I invaded Wakanda and I forced Black Panther to render all vibranium on Earth completely inert. Every single time I went on these campaigns to gain absolute power, I always failed. And so his idea was, if I failed in that direction, maybe I would succeed in the other direction. And so for him, it's really just kind of logic at this point in time. Now, there's also a lot of things that Brian Michael Bendis doesn't say that he's really inferring here, in the sense that when Doctor Doom essentially remembers everything during Secret Wars, he also remembers this conflict with Reed Richards. He always remembers what he said. And it could simply just be the fact that there was a lot of catharsis that came out of Victor Von Doom admitting to Reed Richards words, that he always wanted to be him. Maybe it's just that was one thing that he was always holding on to, and the reason why he simply could not become a good guy. Again, Brian Michael Bendis, one of the reasons why I love the way he writes characters is because he treats them like people. And so he doesn't tell us every single thing they're thinking, because when you have a conversation with someone, they don't tell you every single thing they're thinking. You're just kind of forced to read between the lines if you choose to do so, and get a better understanding of where they're coming from by how it is they say things, why they're saying things, and their own, their own body language. And so because of that, Bendis basically just kind of says, look, you got to infer a little bit here, but in the end, Doom is trying to become a good guy. Doom is trying to do the right thing. Now, of course, what ends up happening here is we end up having Ben Grimm actually transition over to the old lab of Dr. Doom. And when he gets there, we end up actually finding out like the little chunks of rock on his face and on his body start falling off. And this is when we actually find out the reason this is happening is because of the fact that Dr. Doom's mom is residing inside of his old laboratory. And so again, this is really, really cool. It's one of these really cool situations that begin to unfold simply because of the fact that we end up having Dr. Doom's mom showing that she's extremely powerful in terms of her abilities. Now, at this point, we switch back over to Maria Hill. And the funny thing about this is that Maria Hill, of course, if she was smart, would have kept this information to herself regarding the fact that she was somehow captured by El Diablo. But what she's basically done is she's more or less done that to a degree, but she also kind of has everybody out looking for Dr. Doom, or at the very least, Ben Grimm looking for Dr. Doom. This is the reason why Grimm's looking for him in the first place, is because Maria Hill tasked him to do so. Now, the reason why it was Ben Grimm and not all of S.H.I.E.L.D. is because it's really just Maria Hill trying to make sure that her capture by El Diablo and her being freed by Victor Von Doom is kept under the radar. If the world became aware of the fact that the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the world's foremost intelligence gathering organization and peacekeeping force, was captured by a D-list villain, people would lose faith in S.H.I.E.L.D. in its entirety. They would say S.H.I.E.L.D. is the most inept organization ever, run by the most ridiculous person ever. We should not allow them to have the kind of power that they have. It would just bring S.H.I.E.L.D. crashing down to the ground just because of the fact that everybody in there would look like buffoons. And so because of this, Dr. Doom basically just arrives on the helicarrier, which is really kind of funny here because this is one of these are these little goodies, right? These little tidbits, these fun little things that we get with his character, the way he's written by Bendis. When he shows up here, Maria Hill's like, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I mean, think about it this way. If I had done something, if I had shown up on the radar somewhere, then you probably would have sent everybody in S.H.I.E.L.D. to come after me. Maybe you would have sent, other individuals, Ben Grimm or somebody like that to come after me. But I appear here, which saves you all kinds of money. It saves you dozens of man hours. It saves you all kinds of time, and it keeps you from losing face, And so basically it's Dr. Doom's kind of like, I did you a favor. But the question becomes, why are you having Ben Grimm coming after me? Why are you having him chase me? I literally saved your life. And so there's a little back and forth that goes on here, with regards to their discussion, and their conversations. But the idea here is that Dr. Doom basically says, look, I saved your life. You owe me for that. All right, take Ben Grimm off my tail and stop having S.H.I.E.L.D. monitor Dr. Pereira. Now, the question that also comes after this is, where is Ben Grimm at the moment? Where's he at this particular point in time? And the reason why this question is brought up is because Dr. Doom makes the statement that he basically defeated Ben Grimm. Well, because of the fact that Ben Grimm hasn't returned, Maria Hill's question is, where is he? At which point, we end up having one of her agents basically say he's in Latveria. Well, at this point, Doom whisks off. And the reason why is because of the fact that he knows no good can come out of Ben Grimm being in Latveria. The other half of this is that Ben Grimm may start stumbling around and asking questions that he has no business asking about the history of Victor Von Doom outside of the various, escapades that the Fantastic Four have been involved in with Dr. Doom over the course of his history as their main villain. And so because of this is when Brian Michael Bendis basically shows us the current state of Latveria. And the reason why this matters is because of the fact that in the first story arc of Invincible Iron Man, we saw what Latveria was about to a degree, but only insofar that the place was in ruins following Dr. Doom abandoning it. But we hadn't really learned how far it had fallen. And what we end up finding out is, again, it's basically, Brian Michael Bendis refreshing us on the fact that the general who was left in charge by Victor to basically restore Latveria or keep Latveria in check has essentially become corrupt, and he's more or less turned it into a totalitarian state, giving himself absolute power. Now, of course, Victor basically takes all this out. I mean, he basically goes, to Karadec, I think his name is, the general at the time, and says, look, you're not going to be the one that runs this place with absolute power, I clearly cannot trust you to do that. I clearly cannot trust you to be the one who controls things with absolute certainty. And so what he does is he says, go find a woman by the name of Angela Crore. Now, Angela Crore is an example of where Bendis just kind of injects his own little bit into individual stories, because Angela Crore is basically a new character. She never existed before. We've never really seen or heard of her before. She's been created by Brian Michael Bendis for the sake of this story in order to basically allow Doom to operate outside of Latveria and presumably return to his normal role without having to worry about rebuilding Latveria. Eventually it'll go back to its normal self. But what ends up happening here is Dr. Doom basically stumbles into Ben Grimm, only for us to discover that the little bits and pieces of Ben Grimm have fallen off all over the place, all at the hands of Dr. Doom's mom. Now, this encounter between the two of them is crazy, and it's one of the coolest things ever, because Victor's response to this is the most predictable response. And again, this is why I love the way that Brian Michael Bendis writes characters. Victor Von Doom's response is, who are you and why are you acting as my mom? Well, of course, Cynthia begins to effectively say, hey, look, I am your mom. Like, I am your mom in every sense of the word. But Victor does not want to believe it. And the reason why is because if he did, everything that he's worked for up to now would feel as though it's essentially been lost. Because remember, a majority of his life was defined by his mom's soul having been captured. And it's one of these situations where it's like, if everything that happened to me led to where I am right now, then would I go back and change it? And Doom would say no. I mean, we've had that conversation with the Mayor Pereira. He basically says, everything I've done over the course of my life and the motivations behind those actions have led me to this moment right now. If any of those variables were to change, well, then suddenly everything could change. It could be that I would wake up tomorrow and suddenly I have the Infinity Gauntlet in my hand and I have absolute power over the universe. So Dr. Doom essentially says, look, if his mother is alive, then the question is, how did she come back? And if she is really back, then what role is she going to play? But it's also the idea that at the same time, and this is one of the reasons why I love this so much, at the same time, this is Victor Von Doom's mom. For those of us who have lost a family member that's very, very close to us, what would we give to have that family member back? I don't know about you guys, but there are those individuals in my life that I've lost that I would literally sacrifice everything. I'd walk away from YouTube forever and I'd give up everything I owned if it meant that I could spend like another day talking to them, and I would talk to them for the whole day. I would literally walk away from everything if it meant that I could do that. So that's one of the cool things, is that's one of the other reasons why I love Bendis, the way he handles characters, is because it's Dr. Doom at his most basic. It's the idea that Victor, despite all the bravado, despite all the pomp and circumstance and all the power and all that kind of crazy cool stuff, at the end of the day, it's him, it's a son who is really kind of forced to believe that his mother may very well still be alive. But what ends up happening here is his mother actually says, look, I'm proud of who you are right now. Like, I'm proud of what you've become. I'm proud of what you've done at this point in time. But the other half of this is she's still very much a dark character. She's not evil, or at least doesn't seem to be that way. Instead, her initial response is, this guy, this Ben Grimm thing, needs to go away. We need to eliminate him. We need to get rid of him. Doom's response is, no, he lives, send him away. Just send him back to S.H.I.E.L.D., wherever it is that he needs to go to. But what ends up happening here, and what's basically taking place, is she basically just leaves. When Dr. Doom is, again, refusing to believe that she's alive, when Dr. Doom's refusing to believe that it's his mom, she says, look, fine, we'll get back together, we'll get our heads cleared, we'll get things sorted out when you're more inclined to be receptive. And so what ends up happening here is we switch back to Cynthia Von Doom, we switch back to her base of operations where she's, engaging in all her magic, sorcery, different things like that. And what we find out is that the disembodied voice that she's been talking to belongs to Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe. So this is crazy, because what it means is that Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe is still alive. Reed Richards from the Ultimate Universe is presumably going to be the main enemy of Victor Von Doom. Okay, so we are finally back into Infamous Iron Man. I've seen a lot of you guys asking for it. One thing that you guys got to keep in mind is that when it comes to Marvel, and DC Rebirth has spoiled me so bad when it comes to this, one of the things when it comes to Marvel is they publish a story once a month. So when the story finishes, if it takes 6 issues, we have to wait 6 months. I can't make them print them faster. As much as I wish I could, which is one of the downsides to Marvel Legacy, is it'll probably be 6 months before a lot of the stories are finished, although they may be cranking out 4-issue story arcs, in which case it's only 4 months. But the fact remains, we've had to wait a while until this story got finished, but Infamous Iron Man is still one of the absolute best Iron Man stories ever. I love Doom Iron Man and I love Riri Williams Iron Man. Like they're great, I guess Ironheart, but I think they're great characters. But Doom Iron Man just brings this pizzazz, like a villain turned superhero, in such a cool way. So for those of you guys who are playing catch up with regards to this, if you guys never saw the first one, it'll be down in the description in the Iron Man playlist. But the idea of Infamous Iron Man all really came out out of two things. It came out of All New, All Different Marvel, and it came out of the believed death of Tony Stark after Civil War II. So of course, Secret Wars 2015 basically dealt with the idea of Victor Von Doom becoming God. He had just an insane amount of power. I mean, he controlled Battle World, and he had the power of the Beyonders, and he could do anything he wanted to. And it was like the culmination of everything from his introduction in Marvel Comics all the way up to Secret Wars. And the way that Hickman did it was absolutely amazing. But the fact remains here, with regards to the events after Secret Wars 2015, going into All New, All Different Marvel, it was somewhat of a redemption story. Doom had basically been reborn, more or less, by Reed Richards with his face completely restored. That was a hallmark of his character, is that his face was scarred just because of his experiments and so on and so forth. But the idea is that during Civil War II, when Tony Stark had battled Carol Danvers and was believed to have been dead, Dr. Doom picked up the mantle of Iron Man alongside Riri Williams. So where Riri Williams followed the character as Ironheart, Dr. Doom basically became the new Iron Man in the form of Infamous Iron Man. And the way that he did this was really more along the lines of just using a combination of Iron Man's technology along with his own magic. And it was super cool because one of the first things that we ended up seeing was him basically going through and trying to convince everybody he was a good guy. But in the background, there was this subplot with the return of Dr. Doom's mom. Now, Cynthia Von Doom was this character who was largely intertwined into the origin of Dr. Doom. And this story will actually build off of an existing story called Triumph and Torment, which is amazing. It's a Dr. Doom, Doctor Strange crossover, and it's super cool. But the whole idea is that the origin of Cynthia was that she was basically a character who had dabbled in witchcraft. And the result was that she was basically ousted by the villagers. They really just kind of condemned her and different things like that. And that was the end of her. Her passing was a huge part of Victor Von Doom. But the idea is that going forward into his future's publication history, we ended up finding out that his mother's soul had been bonded by Mephisto, who was basically the representation of Satan in the realm of Marvel Comics. And the idea was that Dr. Doom had gone again and again and again in an effort to basically rescue her soul with no perceived way to be able to pull it off. Basically, Mephisto, being as powerful as he is in his home dimension, was seemingly unstoppable. Doom couldn't actually win, and so it seemed like his mother's soul was going to be bound for all eternity to the realm of Mephisto. Now, this led into Triumph and Torment, which dealt with Dr. Doom and Doctor Strange teaming up and then going to the realm of Mephisto, defeating him, and then freeing the soul of Victor Von Doom's mom. And so that's how things kind of resided, going all the way up until Secret Wars 2015. The problem with this was that when All New, All Different Marvel launched and Cynthia Von Doom showed up, we didn't really know what was going on because she's not part of the clutches of Mephisto anymore. She's out doing her own thing. And so it seemed like just kind of reintroducing her character in a way to tell new stories. The other half of this was that she was allied with Reed Richards, and that was a crazy thing. It was the Ultimate Universe Reed Richards, but Reed Richards nonetheless. And that's where the plot started to thicken, because it was the idea, what do these two characters have in common? And if they're working together, do they have an ulterior motive to get revenge on Doom as Iron Man? So the idea is that this basically results in Riri Williams and Victor Von Doom meeting each other for the very first time. And it's a really cool exchange because Riri's whole storytelling, everything that goes on with her character, is the fact that she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's experimenting, she's trying to figure herself out as a hero. She has the AI of Tony Stark to guide her as best he can, but when it comes to being a superhero, it's riding a bike. Sometimes you just gotta jump on, start pedaling, and hope you don't fall. Doom encountering Ironheart is a cool scenario because in truth, she's woefully over her head, because you're talking about trying to battle one of the most powerful sorcerers in all of Marvel Comics. And when I say the most powerful sorcerers, I'm talking about a guy who was able to steal the power of Galactus. So Doom is not just some guy who's really strong on Earth, he's powerful across the board. The other half of this is that it's more of a conversation than an actual battle between the two of them, partially because Ironheart's listening to what it is that Tony Stark's saying, but the other half is because she's just curious. She's curious about Dr. Doom, because with the two of them being as powerful as they are, really him being as powerful as he is, and then suddenly becoming a good guy, it begs the question, what could he achieve? And that's the cool thing about Infamous Iron Man. With Dr. Doom being one of the most powerful beings in existence, if he becomes a good guy, imagine what he could accomplish. Imagine what he could pull off. And so ultimately, this conversation between him and Ironheart leads to the idea of Doom basically saying that he had a spirit journey of sorts. He had this sort of vision where he communed with someone from the future, didn't know who they were, and they were in possession of incredible technology. And the idea is to regain that vision. Now, Bendis isn't just pulling this out of nowhere. It's basically Bendis building on all this stuff when it comes to Dr. Doom. Despite his arrogance and his hubris and all those aspects of his character that he displayed before, he was nothing if not methodical. And whenever it was that he came across something he didn't fully understand, it was research, learn everything there is to know, and then make a move. And that's what he does here. He's basically just kind of received this spirit vision somewhere along the line, and the goal is to duplicate the process, which was basically heightened adrenaline that led to this vision, and then in turn decipher it, find out what it is, and then see if there's a way that he can use it. The cool thing about this is that in order to pull it off, he basically just has Ironheart attack him. He's just like, attack me with all the energy you have. But the funny thing is that when this happens and he's presumably kind of knocked unconscious, he basically ends up finding out that the person he's communing with is Tony Stark. And this is crazy because it looks like Tony Stark with the powers of Doctor Strange. And so it's kind of weird because we have no indication of where this is going. It's basically just the idea that Tony Stark is communing directly with Doctor Strange from some point in the future in a city of New York that just seems to be wildly technologically advanced. Now again, this is one of the reasons why I love Bendis when he ties into continuity. He doesn't always do that, but sometimes he does. During Jonathan Hickman's run on Avengers and New Avengers, it was the first story arc when Captain America basically destroyed the Infinity Gauntlet. He tried to use it to stop the incursions, Earths crashing into each other. The Infinity Gauntlet couldn't handle it. All the gems shattered except for the Time Stone, which disappeared into the time stream. The idea was that when that happened, nobody knew where the Time Stone went. Eventually it popped back up again. It grabbed Captain America and a handful of others and started jumping them into the future. There was a point where Captain America ended up something like 50,000 years in the future, and the world was just a giant sentient mind. And so it's cool to see how those things play out in the sense that maybe this is a part of that time stream. And so this kind of thing is something that Bendis will probably build on. For the moment, it's basically just, Tony Stark saying, you cannot be Iron Man anymore. You have to stop. But we don't know why. The implication is that he's drawing the wrong kind of attention from some external force out there, but we don't know for sure. The other half of this is what goes on with this version of Reed Richards, this Ultimate Reed. He really just seemingly popped out of nowhere. And it was the idea that he initially appeared to Ben Grimm. And that's kind of a big deal because remember, ever since Secret Wars ended and All New, All Different Marvel started, Valeria Richards, Franklin Richards, Susan Storm, and Reed himself were basically just out there in the middle of nowhere creating universes using the Molecule Man's powers and then just throwing them out there. And that's all they've done. Now we know because of Marvel Legacy, we know they're still out there doing their own thing. What it did is it left Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm back on Earth to pick up the pieces. And so they still are reeling from the after effects of being part of the Fantastic Four for so long, only to have no idea where Reed and Susan are at the moment, what they're doing, and why they haven't made their presence known. Now, of course, this is Marvel basically handling the Ike Perlmutter push to keep the Fantastic Four out of comics so long as Fox has the rights to them in film form. But it does make for some cool storytelling because it's basically the idea that Ben Grimm encountering this ultimate version of Reed does not believe that he's Reed, and it actually results in a fight between the two of them. But it also deals with the idea that Ben Grimm is still getting over the fact that Reed isn't there, that Johnny Storm is still getting over the fact that Reed isn't there. They're dealing with it as best they can. When Ben Grimm goes to Johnny and says, hey, some version of Reed showed up to me, I don't think it's our Reed, Johnny Storm can't handle it. He's like, look, it's too soon, it's too close, and he just leaves. It's the Johnny Storm bravado. It's the, whoa, I've got to put on the big front and I've got to look like a tough guy instead of allowing his motions to kind of be exposed to Ben Grimm. That's a hallmark of their characters in the sense that when it comes down to it, they fight together, but in moments of peace, when there's no real conflict, they're very guarded in terms of how they relate to each other. With Dr. Doom having passed out after his Vision Quest and then being dropped off at a SHIELD helicarrier by Riri Williams because presumably it's the only thing she knew to do, what ends up happening is one of the SHIELD agents shows up and then actually kills a couple of agents and then goes to, at least seems to try to kill Dr. Doom. Now, of course, we end up finding out that this was basically mind control done by Dr. Doom's mom, which is really kind of cool because then the question becomes, what's her motivation here? What's her basis behind this? Now, with her bringing Dr. Doom back to her home, what it does is it introduces a little bit of a retcon here. In the origin story of Dr. Doom, he had the idea that his mom was practicing witchcraft, but didn't really know much about it. What this does is it injects the idea that his mom tried to get him to practice witchcraft. He was terrified of it and ran off, and his mom considered him a coward for it, but it's a little tiny retcon, but it's cool because it provides this really interesting context into how it is that Doom views his mom. That maybe his mom, despite the fact that she was practicing witchcraft, was not the great mom that we believe she was when it came to Dr. Doom. That she was basically witchcraft above all, and if my son won't do it, then my son is a coward, and basically just kind of cut him loose. And so again, it's interesting because in this moment is the question, explain to me what's going on. How are you here? I thought your spirit went to heaven. How are you back here? How can you exist in this realm? And a lot of these questions questions aren't readily answered. Instead, it's just kind of like, well, we'll meditate on it. We'll get together and we'll just kind of meditate and we'll maybe have this discussion somewhere along the line, but that's it. There's no real answers given to him by Cynthia Von Doom. The only thing that she really hits at is that you are safe here. This is a safe place. She keeps hitting at the idea that she has greater plans for her son. Now, this also begins to show itself in the sense that she's teaching him more about witchcraft, and that's the important thing. When it comes to Dr. Doom, he's wildly powerful, but he doesn't know everything about everything. There's always something new to learn. That's the basis of his character. Ultimately, in the middle of all this, we end up having Reed Richards show up out of nowhere and basically say, we had a plan. He's not supposed to be here. And so that's why this is cool, is because the plot thickens. It gets more complicated because when Ben Grimm shows up in Latveria and Doom is just sort of sent flying out of this dimensional plane and says, dude, you have to run, you have to go. We end up finding out that Ben Grimm had transported him to a SHIELD helicarrier. And that's when Doctor Strange starts to come into the mix. One thing to keep in mind, when it comes to the Marvel hierarchy among the various characters, there are a lot of people that can use magic. Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme. Now, while there are other characters who may be more powerful than him in one form or another and at what point or another, for the most part, he is the authority on magic. Usually, Doctor Strange is considered to be the most powerful of all the magic wielders, but momentarily, somebody will pop up with more power than him. But because Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme, and because both Strange and Doom had fought together in freeing the soul of Cynthia Von Doom from the clutches of Mephisto, they have this kind of bond between the two of them. But Dr. Doom, despite the fact that he could leave the SHIELD helicarrier, chooses not to. And the reason why he chooses not to is because he's scared. Notice this moment when Doctor Strange says, if you're here, it's because you're afraid. And if you're afraid, then I am terrified. And that's why it's so cool, is because Doom has seen and done it all. If there's something out there he's terrified of, it's something either Strange has not encountered before, or if he has encountered it, it's of a level so extreme that it terrifies one of the most powerful sorcerers in the world. And so as they begin going through, and as they begin talking about what this threat may be, with Ben Grimm just sort of watching all these events unfold, suddenly Reed Richards shows up and immediately starts challenging all these different members of SHIELD. And as these conversations go back and forth, these two things are juxtaposed right next to each other. Reed Richards just like, making his way in there saying, hey, look, I'm not here to attack. I'm here to just talk to Victor Von Doom, tell me where he is. And then it gets to the point where Von Doom says, I do not think that's Reed Richards. I think it's someone else. And then suddenly everything changes. And that's when we end up finding out this is not Reed Richards. It was never Reed Richards. This person is Mephisto. And that is cool. Brian Michael Bendis, kudos. When Mephisto reveals himself, but Doctor Strange starts putting the two together and basically begins to realize it's Mephisto. And so the question is, has he rebound Cynthia Von Doom's soul? Well, then we end up finding out that's not the case at all. Instead, Mephisto does not readily engage them in battle. He does to a degree, but it takes the combined efforts of Doctor Strange and Victor Von Doom to kind of run him off. What we end up finding out here is that Cynthia Von Doom was never there, that Reed Richards was never there. All of this has been a ruse by Mephisto. Revenge for freeing the soul of Cynthia Von Doom. Now, let that sink in for a second. We're talking about two of the most powerful sorcerers in existence, Doctor Strange and Dr. Doom. Both of them duped by Mephisto. That's how he works. Mephisto doesn't usually pop up and then just start saying absolute power and immediately start attacking everybody. He works behind the scenes to dupe people. He appears in immortal guise, presumably aiding you. And the idea is to trick you into asking for his help. And when you give it to him, he'll take your soul when you die. That's how it works with him. It's one of the coolest things when it comes to Marvel Comics because he's a cosmic entity who's insanely powerful, but doesn't readily delve in action and battle. And so the idea is that because people still don't necessarily trust Dr. Doom, and because Mephisto says, this was all just a ruse for me to trick you, that's all it is, I'm just giving you a hard time and I will be back for more, then it puts infamous Iron Man on edge because it's Bendis basically saying Mephisto will probably be a big part of his stories later on down the line. We'll see more of him here than we probably have anywhere else. But it's also infamous Iron Man trying to basically instill the fact in SHIELD and almost everybody that he is there to be a good guy. And so at the end of the day, they say, fine, then we'll just let you do that. We'll let you be a good guy. We really don't have any reason to stop you because you haven't done anything within recent memory that we can do anything about. Because remember, not everybody remembers the events of Secret Wars. And so because of that, it's basically him just kind of going forward and him just being a good guy, continuing to be a hero. It's this great story dealing with how he became Iron Man. Some of the most important moments of his life come to to bear, and Mephisto getting this little bit of revenge, and then presumably coming back later on down the line. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.